But we'll start, Caro and Leigh, by turning our attention, as I said, to the catastrophe for the Bombers last night at the MCG. They sink to the bottom of the ladder. Injuries galore. Where to next for the Red and Blacks?
And we're going to hear in a moment from Jackie Reid the extent of the carnage from last night. It continued for Richmond today in their VFL game. More of that in a moment. Look, on the positive side, the fact that 17th v 18th can attract nearly 80,000 people to the MCG is a wonderful, wonderful indictment on the game and the support for the Dreamtime concept that people like Kevin Sheedy and Simon Matthews, now at Richmond when he was at Essendon, thought up back in the early 2000s. It's a phenomenon. But Bruce, and you know, I was there at the function, some beautiful speeches, some wonderful performances from Richmond's KGI Centre. The President of Richmond, John O'Rourke, putting it on the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, because there's a shortfall for the Punt Road redevelopment. And in his speech, which I thought was a bit cheeky, I think he was asking him, without really asking, for $15 million, but more of that later. Anyway,
there's a few shortfalls in Victoria at the moment, but go on.
It was, this is a footy show, Bruce, not a political show. It was an amateur football. It was like watching an amateur football game. I mean, the standard was appalling, but having said that, one team I felt, Leigh, was more organised for all their problems and wanted it more than the other one. And that was obvious to me from the very start of the game before the carnage began for Essendon.
Yeah, it was 17th versus 18th. That was what it was. And the loser was playing for the wooden spoon in a way because neither side's going to win too many games, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, they were playing for number one pick in this week's mid-season draft, Jackson Artemis, which Richmond had and need, but now Essendon. So there's one of a very, very rare positive for the Essendon Football Club.
But and Richmond got home. They got home by three scoring shots, 3 goals, and deserved their win. They were in front the whole night, no doubt about that. But I think in the what you'd call a bigger picture, where's the hope in the hope levels of these two clubs? Like in terms of next week and next month and next year and the year after that. I mean, I would have thought Richmond have a lot more hope and optimism about the short-term, medium-term future, where Essendon tend to be stuck. They're sort of kind of stuck down the bottom. They've won one game in the last season or so, and there's not a lot there, I would have thought, that will give you much optimism for next year, for instance, let alone next weekend.
Was the carnage injury-wise, which meant Essendon was struggling to even have a bench, and in fact Caldwell, who looked proppy from the beginning and probably should have come off but had to play, is that a mitigating factor for Brad Scott and his future?
Well, for Brad Scott and his future, that's a different issue because that's something for the Essendon board to decide, all that stuff. But in terms of the game last night, no, I didn't think so because Richmond actually got in front. I mean, they were 15 points in front for most of the first half. Essendon's best quarter was probably the third quarter, and they kicked one goal 6 in that quarter, so they were a bit unlucky or poor in their finishing. But you only got 19 fit players, so that should have some effect on the game and the energy levels and all that kind of stuff. But the way I watched the game, I thought Richmond just always looked like they were a goal or two better.
Speaking of the injuries, Jackie Reid to update us very shortly on the latest from the carnage last night to both sides. Richmond suffering a couple of serious injuries as well. But firstly, let's have a listen to Brad Scott, Zach Merritt and Matthew Lloyd last night.
We're not shying away from the challenges we got in front of us, but it's hard tonight not to feel this sense of deja vu of the last 18 months of just getting guys on the park to build something, to show improvement when you're just, throwing guys from half back to half forward to the goal square to one ball, trying to patch it together.
For us internally, it doesn't feel any different. The club's made a very clear strategy. We're all aligned, we're in together, and Brad's a terrific person. He's leading us through this tough period of time, and we're getting good games into kids. So we'll keep backing that strategy.
The Bombers are where they are, 18th on the ladder, and that's probably fitting for where they stand and the type of footy they are playing.
So the voices of the Essendon senior coach, their former captain and club icon, and 3AW's Matthew Lloyd. So can either of you two see this clear strategy that we keep getting told about? Is it obvious to either of you, Leigh and Caro?
It's clear now, and I felt Zach Merritt's words were a bit hollow there because we know that he doesn't really believe in the strategy. He tried to leave last year and he's trying to leave again this year. I want to go back to the other night on AFL 360 and hear what Brad Scott said, and I also want to play what Nate Caddy said to 3AW Footy a few weeks back.
I hear people talk about, do we know where we're at? We made a very, very conscious decision at the end of
2023 that we needed to reset our list. And I think it takes a special kind of lunatic to actually lead this sort of thing, because if you weren't focused on the club's future and it was about just you and your position, you'd have a very different strategy. I fully endorse that strategy and support it.
So that was Brad Scott in the middle of the week, sort of almost putting it on his board really too, and reminding them that they were part of the call, he says, back at the end of 2023. Here's Nate Caddy.
I don't really want to take mediocrity, to be honest. It's really tough to lose by that much 2 weeks in a row, and to be honest, it's been a lot of my career at the moment.
So there were ugly scenes at the end of last night's game, Leigh. Obviously, Darcy Parish was booed when he won the Yoken medal. That was, most Essendon supporters had left the ground. Richmond supporters probably wanted Jayden Short or Noah Bolter to win, and there was that 50-metre penalty against Group, which sort of turned the game. But the Nate Caddy comments from a few weeks ago, that is how I reckon the senior players at Essendon are really feeling. I don't think they knew at the end of 23, Bruce, that there was going to be a rebuild or a reset, as Brad said. I don't think that was communicated to them. And it's interesting that now we seem to be winding back time to the end of 2023 where who did they bring in that year?
Well, I was going to say, let's just go to the facts at the end of 2023. And remembering Brad Scott said we went to the draft. It's crystal clear what we did at the end of 2023. Yes, they got Nate Caddy in at pick 10, Luaman Lawal at pick 39, and they got a diamond in the rough in Archie Roberts at pick 54. But they brought in Todd Goldstein, 35 years young, Jade Gresham and Ben Mackay, both 26. They traded for Xavier Dersma, and at the same time they exited Massimo D'Ambrosio, who's traded to Hawthorn, and Patrick Voss was a delisted rookie. So that's not exactly going to the draft holus bolus or in an extensive fashion.
I think Brad is doing his best to remind the board, and remembering the new CEO, Tim Roberts, was a board member at the time, and Andrew Welsh, I think, was a board member at the time. He's now president. I'm just not sure that theory or that strategy, and everyone's talking this week about the strategy. I don't think the senior players were aware of the strategy at the time, and I think many of them are not particularly happy at the moment. Can we try and simplify? I know they're not happy at the moment.
Can we try and simplify it? So the strategy was, we're not going to bring players in from other clubs. We're going to go to the draft and try and pick the lights out of the draft for the next few years.
Yep.
I mean, is that our... Because I don't know what the strategy is either. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to say, is that the strategy we're talking about?
But at the end of 2023, they brought in 4 players from other clubs.
So they haven't necessarily only done that.
No.
Because what we do know is once you sink down to the bottom of the ladder, you need to pick the lights out of the draft, but you need to get half a dozen players potentially from other clubs, good players from other clubs. Like the Lions are the prime example of this generation, because the Lions were down where Essendon and Richmond were 10 years ago, and you've got to draft well, and you've got to be able to pick some players up from other clubs. So eventually that's all... North Melbourne are probably in that position where they're going to try and pick up some good players from other clubs because they've drafted well, they've made their way off the bottom. But if Essendon's strategy is simply we're going to draft rather than recruit from other clubs for 2 or 3 years, and that's our strategy, but has that happened in 24 and 25, Beaver? I mean, in terms of, because I don't think players buy into that strategy. I don't care who they are. Players want to win and walk off the ground and feel good about themselves and win the club song. So if you say to a player, listen, we're going to mostly lose for a couple of years, they're going to be distraught.
Well, we know how the captain felt about it last year.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The hope, you need to sell hope. So players aren't thinking about, okay, we're going to be terrible now, but we'll be good in 2 years' time. I don't think players think that way at all.
Brad would say we needed a ruckman. We brought in Goldstein to do a bit of coaching and rucking, whatever. We badly needed a key defender. Now, Ben Mackay, look, let's be brutal. He hasn't really worked out, has he?
No.
It hasn't worked.
As a big name, big high price
hasn't worked.
Yeah.
No, and he was overpaid, and I understand why they did it, but it hasn't worked. Bizarrely, and this week we were reminded, and Essendon are saying, well, we announced this at the time in January after we appointed the new CEO in Tim Roberts, that the former CEO, Craig Vozzo, is not reviewing, assessing football departments across other clubs at the AFL to see how a good footy department works. Now, it said at the time when the new CEO was announced, and they obviously moved on Craig Vozzo for whatever reason, and Craig maybe was part of that decision, but that wasn't working out for Craig or the club with him as CEO. He's in Adelaide. He's a consultant to the club. It said he was going to look at list management, recruiting. The guy was a footy CEO for nearly 3 years.
Yeah.
What's he doing now, trying to work out what's the best way to run a footy department?
Well,
Isn't that what he was meant to be doing for the last 3 years?
The whole review process of what's our operation compared to what we think it should be, or it should be better, and therefore doing that. I mean, that has to be happening all the time, to be honest. It's a matter of, if you talk about an informal review or a formal review, that's probably what maybe is a little bit different. But it's Steve Strange. It was someone who was at the club is actually now going to review what they did when I was at the club.
I'm sorry. You could say 4 wasted years. You could actually be brutal and say that, Bruce.
13 past midday on the White Glove Mover clock. Let's bring our gun boundary line superstar and sideline reporter Jackie Reid into the conversation to report or further update us on the injuries from for both clubs from last night. And there's also been fresh injuries today in the VFL game, which continues out at Windy Hill, which the Bombers are currently leading by 18 points.
Well, I might start there with Richmond. Tom Sims, his first game back in 286 games. He had that dislocated elbow and he had a foot injury. His first game at any level today, has suffered a suspected ACL in that VFL game, so he'll be off for scans there. Tom Lynch, after the game, went to hospital for scans on a hit to his throat. He'd lost his voice halfway through the game there. The club is still waiting on scan results and he remains in hospital at the moment. And Jonty Fall has entered concussion protocol. So it was a pretty big night for the Tigers as well. For the Bombers, Andy McGrath, the captain, that was a big one. That was a huge hit. He had 2 hits in a couple of minutes there. He is home from hospital. He has got a broken jaw. Surgery likely early next week. And Coach Brad Scott had this to say post-game.
No, he's terrible. But when you break your jaw and a tooth comes out in the incident, and he's got a pretty noticeable crack that you can see and feel in his jaw, it's not a good one.
So Archer May, another one that went to hospital last night, one of 3 players. He is home from hospital, which is good news. He will be a test for the Bombers. He had a huge knock to his ribs and there were some concerns about his kidney. So he was still waiting on some results for that one as well. Sam Durham into concussion protocols after a big hit from Tom Lynch in the first quarter. Matt Guelphy, he has done his left hamstring, so another hamstring concern for Matt, which has troubled him throughout the last couple of years. I did notice pre-game he started on the bench. He had work done on that left hamstring. He went out onto the ground and then did the left hamstring soon after that. Jai Caldwell was hobbled for most of the night with a syndesmosis concern. He has had that throughout this year. He missed a couple of games there, but he was really sore and, as you guys pointed out, was pushed into the forward line, so he was really limited last night. The Bombers did pull out Elijah Sardis and Will Setterfield from the VFL today, just to make sure they had a bit better availability for next week's game against West Coast.
Great work, Jack, and we send our best wishes to all of those players for speedy recoveries. Just before we take our first call on the Nick Theodosi Prestige Car open line, Frank, we'll get to you in a tick. This was the 3-week period as well that had been identified where we were meant to see the green shoots. Richmond, West Coast next week, in Perth admittedly, and then Carlton in the now traditional Sunday night clash on the eve of the King's birthday Monday. But in the wash-up of last night, it's hard to see them winning either of those 2 games in the next couple of weeks.
No, it's not. And look, really, of the 3 on paper, Richmond was the one that was seen like the most certain victory for the Bombers. Richmond barely able to field a team, etc., etc., etc. Then whatever happened with the injuries, as Leigh has said, I think in the end Richmond was probably the better team on the night, even though they're way below, good AFL standard. Look, reality says that Brad doesn't survive beyond this year. I mean, that's just the realities of footy, unfortunately. You don't win one game in, 25 now, and survive. But this is a footy club that, I said they've wasted years. I mean, Brad came in with one hand behind his back because of all the issues, Kevin Sheedy and all of that stuff. People like Adrian Dodoro staying at the club, even though no one really
believed
him.
When you say Sheed, still agitating for James Hird.
I mean, and he stays on the board. I mean, how does that work? They were a club divided. They remained a club divided. The Dodoro situation, so many problems. Now Dodoro's gone. Now Sheedy's gone, but still a part of their DNA. That's fine. But in the end, I think Brad underestimated the task. It hasn't worked. They still don't have a strong, really robust head of footy, which most successful footy clubs, Leigh, now
it's
seem to
important,
have.
critically important. Well, the thing is that people don't understand there's a senior coach. There's always been a senior coach, but there's now 30 or 40 people in your footy department.
Yep.
So the senior coach might oversee the half a dozen or 8 that in the coaching development area, but then the footy manager does all the other welfare, the conditioning, overseeing all that kind of stuff. So the partnership between the senior coach and the footy manager, I think in football is just absolutely critical.
And Daniel McPherson is clearly going to be, but maybe he'll be a great football person, citizen in years to come, but he's still young, still relatively inexperienced, and in my view they needed more of your Danny Daly, Chris Davies type person, in my view. I'm not saying that Carlton's doing all that well at the moment, but that sort of person. So that was one problem. Daniel Giansiracusa, seen as a coach of the future, he left because he clearly wants to be a senior coach, and he's gone to Hawthorn because I don't think he believed in what was happening at the Essendon Football Club. So it's not just Brad Scott, but in the end, the coach gets the sack when these failures continue, and unfortunately they have. And unfortunately, I don't believe Brad will be there at the end of the year. And I think that's pretty much footy. But just whatever the president and the CEO says, don't believe it.
There's been a bit of discussion about it during the... No, well, I mean, my view was pretty simple. I mean, it's a fairly emotional area down there on the interchange bench there, and the two teams are close together. I think there should be no interaction at all verbally. Certainly not physically, but certainly even verbally between anyone down there. That's my basic view.
And it was a view reinforced by Dean Cox at the Sydney Swans during the week. And I'm told Simon Goodwin, the former Melbourne senior coach and now an assistant, who is doing some work on the bench now that Dean Cox has gone back up to the box this week. So Leigh said what he said. Now, we saw Ken Hinckley get a number of warnings from the AFL and frankly, and finally that massive fine for the Jack Ginnivan exchange, which actually happened after the game. But he and I think Max Gawn used to have some pretty ding-dong dialogue, because you remember the Port players always targeted Max Gawn, and I think Max used to have a crack at Ken, and Ken would have a crack back. And when he got that big fine, the AFL defended it in part by saying he's been warned a lot. Now you've seen what's happened to Alistair Clarkson and that really unfortunate exchange involving Jimmy Webster for one in the St Kilda pre-season game last year, I think it was.
After the Webster hit on Jai Simpkin.
And it ended up, I think Clarko finally ended up being sent up to the box for a while. It staggers me that with all McRae's priors, that the AFL hasn't even sent him a warning, Bruce. I do not understand it. Had that been Clarko, I'm sure that there would have been a warning and potentially a fine or back to your box, Alistair.
Because Craig has got some priors.
Well, he's got that ridiculous, terrible exchange last year with Adam Kingsley, and then the time wasting against Hawthorn, and that's only a couple that come to mind. And now he says this week, I think it's fine. Well, I don't think Brodie Grundy thought it was fine, Leigh.
Yeah, it's more the principle. Just don't interact. Don't verbally interact with the other team. So.
Vincent, welcome to 3AW Footy.
G'day, guys. Love listening to you. Vincent from Sunbury. Leave Craig McRae, and he's got a history with the man. Did he know the ball was going to be so close? I reckon we've got a bigger... Oh, no, Caroline, just give us a minute, will you? Well, I've got the bigger issue we've got is the players on the interchange bench. Look how close they are. No one says anything about that, and it's only going to be a matter of time before something happens. In fact, last night's game between Richmond and Essendon, when there was a couple of players almost joshing off the ground, that could have blown up on the interchange desk. Leave Craig McRae alone. What we need is more of Craig's coaching techniques in our business.
We need more of his good coaching and less of his interchange.
We're talking about the principle, not about Craig himself. We're talking about the principle of a coach or anyone else talking to the opposition around that area.
And double standards from the AFL, Leigh. I'm sorry, because had it been Ken Hinckley or Alistair Clarkson, there would have been a warning.
Would have at least made a statement to the rest of the competition.
Yep.
Thanks, Vincent, for your call, though. Zook, good afternoon to you.
G'day, guys. Caro, how you going? Love listening to you guys. Look, I'll try and be very quick with this. About Brad Scott, there's just too many things that I just don't like about his coaching. First thing is his game plan. The game plan has been the same since he's been there. From the fence, to a fence, opposition teams just running through the middle. It's just and you can't fix it in 4 years. The second thing I want to bring up is you can't go past the fact that He had D'Ambrosio in the side, was subbing him all the time, was playing him forward, and now look what he's doing when they pick him up as a half-back flanker. Same as Voss. He won the best and fairest in the VFL. Didn't even give him a game or two before the season's end to see if he had anything. And he's also doing exactly the same thing with a pick number 5 in Sardis. Right? You can't play the guy for 1 or 2 weeks and then drop him. You need to see if these blokes have got something. He's just not the coach. His selection and that is just terrible. He should not be our coach next year.
Okay, thanks.
On the face of it, Zook, I think you would say that the development at Essendon doesn't seem to have been all that good. They seem to have drawn a line through Sardis, to me, Leigh. I mean, if Setterfield's getting a game ahead of Sardis...
Yeah, he doesn't...
He'll be elsewhere next season, you would imagine.
Yeah, and whether he actually makes it or not will be an indictment on Essendon if he does, because he's got the kicking issue, doesn't really seem to go hard for the ball issue. There's a lot of issues there.
Just make one comment. I mean, people keep talking about game plans. The game plan any game plan only works if the players execute it. And if you keep kicking the ball back to the opposition, for instance, I don't care what your game plan is. You've got to be able to...
How many turnovers last night?
It's a glorified game of keeping's off. That's what I'm saying. When I watch games of footy and people keep talking about game plans, I just see the execution of the players. If the execution's good, you can be competitive. If your execution of your ball skills and all the basic things, tackling, press, all the things that matter, but the execution is the thing that fails most teams. Yeah, I was really interested, and I reckon all the other 18 clubs, although they may have known it was coming, is exactly what are the rules and regulations around the list management, the list build for the new Tasmanian team. And one of the things that really hit me was the first aim was to be competitive from the start. Well, don't you have to earn your stripes? Like you're given a system. What's competitive mean for a start? I say competitive means you're somewhere the top of the bottom half of the ladder. You're not in the bottom 4. You might be able to win 6, 7, 8 games or something like that. Is that a fair definition of a seasonal competitive? And we know that when the Suns came in and the Giants came in, they took 4 or 5 years to climb off the bottom couple on the ladder. And I think to myself, why should Tasmania not have to do that too? In other words, how can you put a list together from scratch that's going to make you really competitive straight away? And I reckon there's been good vibes about the Tasmanian team when you buy the clubs. I mean, the presidents have thought, if a lot of good players have come from Tasmania, maybe they deserve a team. Remember, the teams were put in up north, the Suns and the Giants, because half the population of Australia in the northern states, can we get 10% of that, 10 million people that live in the northern states? So that was like an investment in the future of the game. And the Tasmanian situation, I'm not sure is that much different in a sense of what are they going to add or detract to the game. Be nice to have a Tasmanian team. Can they be financially viable? As you've mentioned a couple of times, Caro, they're going to get 10 million a year, roughly speaking, from the government. 12 million a year for the next 10 years. What happens after that? I mean, are they going to be self-funding? Half the clubs in the competition aren't self-funding above and beyond the
Will Hobart
AFL
be transformed the way Adelaide was when they got a new oval?
It's going to be interesting. As I say, that the good vibes about the Tasmanian team, the rubber's about to hit the road when the clubs are going to be competing with the Tasmanian team with the $5 million excellent sign-on fee,
tangible.
All those kind of things, and in the draft and all those kind of situations. But to be competitive from the start, that to me is a big statement, and I'm not even sure that it's probably not realistic anyway. But even if it's the objective, I mean, I don't think I've got to earn your right. I think, and the Suns and the Giants both have to earn their right for a number of years of not being much good, and eventually the Giants, quicker than the Suns, became good teams. So yeah, that was an interesting premium objective that I read.
Well, the Giants are interesting. They 12, 13, 14, 15 easy beats. 2016, they could have feasibly been in a grand final. They lost that prelim to
the Bulldogs by a goal,
who ended up a bit over a goal, but it was that neck and neck game. So, but they went way down to build and build and build, and their strategy was sound. But the problem was that it skewed the competition because it just wasn't fair to the teams who played the Giants twice in those first couple of years. Because you were winning by 10, 12, 15 goals, and clubs were finishing 8th because they got the Giants twice. Gold Coast were, funnily enough, more competitive earlier, and they had Ablett, etc., and he was a much better buy than Tom Scully turned out to be, but the Giants went for those older Luke Power types who ended up being a much better call. And then they ended up sort of coaching at the club as well. But I think that the AFL, they just don't want that skewing of the competition.
Yeah, I can understand the objective. All I'm saying is to make that happen, it's going to be an enormous disruption of the existing 18 clubs, because it's not going to be equally. You're not going to lose out equally. They're not going to get 18 players from other clubs, top notches, but they might get half a dozen, and the half a dozen clubs that can't compete financially with Tasmania are going to lose big time.
Well, that's why your point about Essendon and Richmond, which club has the most hope. Now, we think Blair Hartley's sort of got it right with that super draft, the draft last year, even though it would have been nice if Tigers had taken Murphy Reid, but other clubs bypassed him as well. They seem to know a lot about him and still not pick him. But you'd say that if the early picks for the last 2 years have been good, that by the time Tassie come in, Richmond should be at least competitive.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
Essendon seem to be still only, even though they said it started at the end of 23, we think it's really only starting now, don't we?
Agreed.
So they would seem to be in a far worse position than Richmond. Ditto the Carlton Football Club, because they seem to, although...
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm unbiased. I think Richmond have got more hope for the years ahead than Essendon have.
But partly because they planned for Tasmania and were right at the bottom at a time, which gave them a few years of a pathway, a runway, as opposed to Essendon.
You don't want to be bottoming out now or only 1 year into a rebuild.
Although maybe Carlton will bring a new coach in and they're not that bad. Who knows?